This is a video about Robert Kroetsch's essay, Disunity as Unity. There's a lot of things going on in this paper, and I'll touch on a few of them. I certainly can't touch on all of them. But if you want to know more, you can certainly ask specific questions, and I can direct you to other readings, because it is a well-read piece. You know, he refers to a lot of authors and things that you may or may not be familiar with, and so I'll just try and unpack some of that for you. So he starts off, and one of the terms here that's important is meta-narrative. And what a meta-narrative is it's a narrative that tends to unify a group of people. Okay, it's the stories that we tell ourselves, not the kind of day-to-day stories, but these, you know, really big narratives. And so one of his examples is the American dream. Okay, and that informs, you know, a lot of what people think about being an American. You know, if you're an immigrant in America, anybody can be anything they want to be, and you know, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, or whatever it is, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's you know, another term that we might use is ideology here. You know, that these are the kind of ideological backgrounds that people sort of adopt without thinking about them. And so partly that's why I gave you those introductory videos in the first week of class, you know, the I Am Canadian beer commercial and stuff like that, to say, you know, who's telling these stories, what kinds of ideas this is perpetuate, and these are meta-narratives. Okay, so what are the meta-narratives that we can identify in Canada? And for Kroetsch, he says one of our meta-narratives is that we can't agree on our meta-narrative, that we, and this is the contradiction of his title, Disunity as Unity. So the very fact that we don't share a meta-narrative, or one single narrative, is what unifies us. So it's our multiplicity of narratives that is our unifying narrative. So it's kind of a contradictory tension of not one narrative, but many narratives that link us together, and it's this disunity that unifies us. So think about that. And so Kroetsch juxtaposes T.S. Eliot's four quartets in 1940 against William Carlos Williams' long poem Patterson. And Eliot and Williams are both Americans, but Eliot is very much on the side of Europe and European traditions. And so Eliot's looking for something that's going to unify this and sort of make it work, whereas Williams is living in New Jersey. Patterson is a city in New Jersey. And he's kind of like, this is America, you know, we're the melting pot, and there's another meta-narrative for you. And we'll make it work somehow. And so Eliot's kind of Eurocentric and classical tradition, and Williams is much more, you know, American-centric, and we'll make it work. And so Kroetsch is pointing these out as the tensions in America, and he's asking us to consider whether or not we have similar tensions in Canada. And so you kind of need some literary history here, you know, American literature and stuff, to understand some of his references. You know, and then he says, you know, the center cannot hold, and that's a reference to William Butler Yeats, contemporary of Eliot's and Williams, who's an Irish poet, and that comes from his poem The Second Coming, which again is a kind of unifying, you know, obviously religious poem, saying, you know, what's going to happen in the 20th century here, and the sort of modernist anxieties that are occurring. So anyway, you know, Kroetsch goes on to use these examples about how Europe is starting to lose its centrality, at least in Western literary discourse, with the emergence of the Cold War, for example, with the USSR and the USA becoming the new global centers of power, that Europe is a bit on the decline, and these are the anxieties, right? People want their meta-narratives to cohere, and if Eliot and others are seeing that the Eurocentric narrative is starting to shake and crack, then what do we replace it with? And you know, we can see it now with the current state of America, which seems to be, you know, in rapid decline under Trump. You know, that where are the new centers going to emerge? Will it be China? Will it be somewhere else in the world? Like, we don't know. And so this creates a lot of anxiety. And so Kroetsch's argument in this paper is that Canada has had this anxiety since its inception. In fact, it's our central anxiety, is what unifies us. And he's suggesting it's this anxiety that's unifying us. So he says the trick is, I suppose, to resist the meta-narrative and still avoid Riel's fate. And that's, I think, a very interesting sentence from this piece, that he says, we want to resist meta-narratives, we want to resist ideology, and we want to resist those unifying narratives that might be based on exploitation or racism or colonialism or misogyny without getting hanged for treason. So for example, if you take the Don Cherry video that I gave you, he says, you people come here and you like our milk and honey, okay? And a lot of people saw that as racist. But a lot of people are like, it's just Don Cherry, that's just who he is. And it's like, why is Don Cherry some cultural icon that we can't critique? Is he racist? Probably. Is he going around saying, I hate black people? No, but he's basically saying in that video, I hate immigrants, or immigrants don't conform to the Canadian way of life. And that's the thing, is that, immigrants come here, they have a right to come here. Canada's a country of immigrants, etc., etc. Why does he single out, those people, you people, as, not conforming to Canada? And this is a debate you hear all the time. People should come to Canada and they should fit in. What does that mean, to fit in? Okay, and there's lots of examples that we could talk about doing this, but what it's saying essentially is you should conform to our meta-narratives in order to fit in. When in fact those meta-narratives may not be as stable as we like to think. They certainly exist in various forms, but part of this course is asking us to interrogate what those meta-narratives mean. So, to continue with Kroetsch, he says, on the interpretation of texts like As for Me in My House by Sinclair Ross, Kroetsch says the competing interpretations are united in their disagreement. That is, debate is central to our sense of national unity. So he's doing a little thing here where he compares textual analysis and textual interpretation to nation building. Okay? That we read texts for stories and we build nations on stories. So we tell ourselves stories through Canadian literature. Why we're taking this course, what stories do we have in Canada, and how does that contribute to our sense of nation? What are the competing stories that we have? And so there's different authors that write different books about different things, and then we have different readers that read the books and come up with different conclusions about the stories that we're writing. And so Kroetsch is making this nice little, I think, relationship between reading text and building nation, that we should think about our disagreements about texts and what they mean in terms of national identity. So Kroetsch is writing this in 1985 in a conference paper that he gave in Edinburgh, Scotland, and he asks the following question: do the provinces or does the federal government deserve the revenue from oil? Now, Kroetsch grew up in Alberta. He moved to Manitoba for a job, taught at the University of Manitoba for a long time. But even in 1985 and prior to that, this debate that we still have nowadays, just listen to contemporary political rhetoric, what is the relationship of, say, provincial resources, in this case Alberta's oil? We could talk about Newfoundland's oil just as easily, or BC's timber. What is the relationship of provincial resources to federal jurisdiction? Okay. Right now, Jason Kenney seems to be at loggerheads with Trudeau and blah, blah. And, this is not new. This has been going on for a long time, right? So these discussions have happened. They continue to happen. And so, even within Canadian identity as a nation, we have provincial identities as Alberta or as British Columbia or any other province that we might think about. And we can get into the nitty-gritty of, all the various relationships that we have across the nation. And so do we find that we have disunity in Canada? Absolutely. I talked about regionalism in other videos. But we have, for example, the Wexit Party right now, and they're like, we should separate from Canada. Separatism's not new. Quebec's been talking about that for a long time, but now it's coming up in Alberta, and it has a long precedent in Alberta as well. So what are these narratives that we tell ourselves? How do we understand these stories? Whether you agree with them or disagree with them doesn't really matter, but we can identify them, and we can have conversations and say, what do these things mean to us as a nation? And so Kroetsch talks about how Canada sort of lacks heroes like the United States does. One example he uses is Daniel Boone, but we could, think of Billy the Kid. We could think of, their leaders like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and, they have heroes, and if you know American writing, they always talk about writing the great American novel. And one of my old Canadian literature professors used to say, you know, Americans talk about writing the great Canadian novel, and Canadians talk about writing the pretty good Canadian novel. That we have this, you know, inferiority complex around our writing, but it also fits into Kroetsch's thesis, you know, that we don't have the great Canadian novel. We just have a bunch of good ones, and it's this multiplicity that goes into the makeup of who we are. Okay. And another good example I think that Kroetsch touches on to support his argument is Rudy Weeb's novel, The Temptations of Big Bear. And in there he talks about Big Bear as a figure who refuses to be baptized, and he refuses the reserve. And so this is the refusal of the meta-narratives. He refuses the meta-narrative of Christianity, baptism, and he refuses the meta-narrative of colonialism, okay, the reserve system set up by the Canadian government. So where does that leave a figure like Big Bear? It leaves him kind of nowhere. And it's up to him to try and figure out where in the Canadian landscape he fits. Literally, where are you going to live if you're not on the reserve as an Indian, right? Where are you, right? And where are you in the Canadian imaginary in terms of being a citizen of this country? So hopefully there's lots to talk about in this text that we can touch on in the discussion group.